Saint Peter is famous as the bearded bouncer who controls the pearly gates of heaven. But how did he get there? Where and how can we trace the footsteps of a saint? He started out as a simple fisherman who followed Jesus, but he ended up holding the keys to the kingdom. Where did Peter the man spend the last of his days? And is there any archaeological evidence that supports what tradition tells us about this saint? This is the most iconic Christian church in the world, St. Peter's Basilica. It stands here at the Vatican in Rome, where, according to Christian tradition, Peter labored the last of his days as the first pope.
What is your name, my friend?
Jesus gave the apostle Peter his name, changing it from Simon to Peter. In Aramaic, Cephas, which means rock.
That's a good name.
And he said to Peter, "Upon this rock I will build my church. To you I will give the keys to the kingdom of heaven." And so, after Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, tradition tells us that Peter came to Rome. And this is the place to which millions and millions of tourists flock. That's because the majority of Christians believe St. Peter, the founder of the Christian church, was buried right inside here. After he was crucified, here. By this guy, here. Nero, emperor from 54 to 68. It is written that Nero crucified St. Peter, blaming the Christians for the great fire that nearly destroyed Rome in 64. And according to tradition, before his death, Peter was jailed here along with the Apostle Paul. The two most famous apostles shared a cell at the edge of the Roman Forum in Mamertine prison. This is Mamertine prison. From the 6th century onwards, there's written tradition that Peter was incarcerated here. The tradition says that he was a prisoner here along with Paul, and that's why you have the upside-down cross on the altar here, which represents the tradition that Peter was crucified in Rome upside down. There's also a well here that supposedly sprung water, and Peter and Paul used that water to baptize their guards, to convert them to Christianity. There's also a tradition that a hole in the wall here was caused when Peter's head was bashed against the wall by his guards, I guess before they converted to Christianity. This isn't exactly archaeology. It's tradition. And Rome is covered by the footprints of Peter's traditions. But maybe we can find some archaeology if we follow the footsteps here.
Maybe he knows about St. Peter.
According to tradition, Nero's soldiers chased Peter down this very road. I asked Roman historian Mino Carbone, what's so special about this road?
Oh, wow, we are on the most important Roman road, the Appian Way, built in the year 312 before Christ.
So if St. Peter was in Rome, this is the road that he walked?
Yeah, he approached the city through this road. And it is important because it linked Rome to the main port in the south, Brundusium, today Brindisi.
These are the first highways, really.
This is really the first highway in the world, 400 miles long, very fast road. They have to move 1,000 soldiers. They have to move a lot of goods between Rome and the rest of the eastern province.
So 2,000 years ago, we would see legionnaires marching on the side, chariots.
Yes, chariots.
You can see the tracks, right?
Yes, just if you look, you can see the tracks. 1,000 million people traveled on this road, which was very important. And according to legend, even St. Peter's came to Rome and used this road.
So Peter's footprints could be somewhere on these cobbles. Not only that, Mino tells me that this is the famous road described in the Acts of Peter, on which Peter fled from Rome and had a vision of Jesus.
If St. Peter fled Rome, he would have fled on this road. He would have had this apparition of Jesus on this
road, the Appian Way. And Peter said, oh, you remember the story, Domine quo vadis, which means, oh, Lord, where are you going?
We're going to the very spot where Peter asked, where are you going? To the church of Domine quo vadis. Because inside the church, on the stones of the ancient Via Appia, Mino tells me he's seen footprints.
Why is there a church here, and what are these footprints?
Because these footprints belonged to Jesus, according to legend. Because Peter, in the year 67, was living in Rome because Nero started to persecute Christians because of the fire of the city of Rome. St. Peter's, at this point of the Appian Way, had the vision of Christ, Jesus Christ.
A vision right here.
Appeared just here. And he said, "Oh Lord, where are you going?" And Jesus answered, "Peter, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again." So Peter understood, maybe I have to go to Rome to be crucified. He turned back, went to Rome, and just in that moment was captured by the Nero soldier and crucified.
Crucified upside down.
Upside down, because he said, "I'm not going to die in the same way of Christ." He wanted to die in a different way.
And these are the footprints of the vision? This is the authentic?
No, the authentic actually is in the church of Saint Sebastian, next door.
Mino takes me further along the Via Appia, because legend has it that in the middle of the 2nd century, Rome was persecuting Christians with abandon. And so the early followers moved the remains of St. Peter and St. Paul, temporarily storing them in the secret catacombs beneath this church. And the real Quo Vadis footprints are here, because this church has a strong tradition associated with the first apostle.
That's the footsteps?
Those are the original Jesus foot imprint.
I can barely see the footsteps. They seem different.
Different because we can see a foot imprint that go down into the rock.
Deeper.
Deeper, because that is the evidence of the presence, the divine presence of Jesus Christ on the Appian Way. That is the reason why here are deeper. You can see, I can see the shape of the foot.
They're big feet, if I may say so.
Pretty big, because Jesus was supposed to be a very tall man.
What size shoe would you say that?
I can tell you that in Italian it would be 43, 44, which is an 8, 9.
I think it's more like a 11 maybe.
11 maybe. Okay, I don't know how much is it.
So we now have footsteps
Yes.
of Jesus after his death appearing in Rome,
Yes.
but we don't have any footsteps for Peter.
No footsteps of Peter, I'm sorry. Peter was not like Jesus. Jesus is the Messiah, is the God's Son. Peter became saint after he was crucified. Peter was the one chosen by Jesus to be his vicar, the first apostle, the first pope.
So it's very important for the church that he would have come to Rome.
Of course. Peter originated the center of the Christian church in the world, which is Rome.
St. Peter's Basilica.
St. Peter's Basilica, of course.
The Vatican.
The Vatican City.
St. Peter's Basilica. Although I followed the sacred footprints, I've not yet seen the archaeological evidence proving St. Peter was ever here in Rome. But underneath this basilica, one of the holiest sites in Christendom, they did find something extraordinary, what some would call Peter Perfect. This is St. Peter's Basilica, the latest version. Vatican archaeologist Olaf Brandt tells me it's been built over top the original basilica, built by Constantine as a symbol of Rome's acceptance of Christianity.
What you see now is a basilica which was erected from the beginning of the 16th century. But Constantine built his first St. Peter's Basilica in around 320.
Because there had been this tradition that Peter was buried here.
Because there was a place venerated as the tomb of the Apostle Peter.
It's for this reason that hundreds of popes have been laid to rest here. They were buried here on faith, faith that this is where St. Peter rests. But in 1939, faith and archaeology got a little mixed up.
Well, what happened was when Pope Pius XI died in 1939, he wanted to be buried in the crypts beneath St. Peter's, and they were in a very bad state, and they wanted to reconstruct them. So they removed the floor in the crypt, and they discovered ancient remains of a Roman cemetery.
The construction crew had stumbled upon an ancient necropolis, a city of the dead. Archaeologists were called in, and within months, they had unearthed a long underground street of both pagan and what seemed to be early Christian tombs and mausoleums.
Are the excavations conclusive, non-conclusive? What's the result from an archaeological point of view?
Well, you know, the Vatican has no official position on archaeological questions. Most experienced scholars agree that Peter was buried there.
Okay, so what is that based on?
That's based on the fact that we have clearly a monument commemorating Peter, built around 160.
Below the floors of the modern basilica, they found a memorial to Peter. On the floor was a trap door that opened onto what was believed to be Peter's tomb.
Here it is. We found it. The tomb.
A brick drain was discovered close by, marked with a Roman factory stamp, dating it to as early as 147 AD. At that time, there would have been no basilica above. Rome was smaller, and this area was outside city limits, in catacomb country, known to be frequented by early Christians. Beside the tomb, on a wall, the archaeologists discovered a surprising amount of what looked to be Christian graffiti.
There is especially one graffiti which is particularly famous in Greek, which actually is on a piece of plaster which fell down from the wall, so it was found separate. The most famous reading of this graffiti is "Peter is here." But there is another possible reading which is "Rest in peace." And it may not be Peter at all, it may be another name because it's broken. But these graffiti show people went there for a very important reason, and probably that important reason had something to do with Peter, because he is mentioned by the graffiti.
So let me see if I understand the evidence. You have basically a mixed cemetery down
Yes.
there, and a monument to Peter is found in that area,
Yes.
leading archaeologists to say, okay, there's a tradition here, there's a monument here, there's no tradition anywhere else. It must be Peter's tomb.
Yes.
On December 23, 1950, after 10 years of excavations, Pope Pius XII announced that a team of archaeologists had found the tomb of St. Peter.
Pope Pius XII presides at the devout ritual, attended by a congregation of 30,000.
Ezekiel cried. But it wasn't just the evidence of Christian graffiti on a wall that made the world take notice. Underneath an old monument, as Professor Ken Bartlett reminds me, they uncovered something human. Well, mostly human.
They discovered a number of bones preserved here.
What bone?
Well, bones were found in there, and the bones were very, very unsatisfactory because, in fact, they weren't the bones of either one person or even one species. There were bones of men and women, there were not complete skeletons, there were animal bones, all put together in this one place.
What was being held up as positive proof of Peter was tested and shown to be a veritable bone bouillabaisse of man, woman, cow, horse, and chicken. It was a big disappointment for the papacy.
But then, interestingly enough, very close to this site, one of the members of the pontifical team found an almost complete skeleton of an adult, middle-aged male between 50 and 60 of robust physique, missing the foot bones. And it was reasonable to assume that if Peter had been crucified upside down and the body was to be taken quickly, especially by Christians who wanted to ensure the body would not be burned or disposed of, they'd have done this very quickly, which would have been simply cutting the feet off, because the feet would have been nailed to the cross, and then this footless body could then have been buried beneath that space in the necropolis in order to protect it from the Romans.
Is there any tradition that he was buried footless?
No.
So what happened to this body?
Pius XII announced that these bones could be identified as those of the Apostle Peter, and they were put in a casket, and that now rests beneath the high altar of St. Peter's.
But meanwhile, all this time, didn't Christian traditions say that Peter's skull is sitting in another church, and
St. John Lateran.
St. John Lateran in Rome was actually the first official Christian cathedral of Rome and home for the first 199 popes. It was commissioned by Constantine at the same time as Peter's Basilica. There is a skull that has been housed and guarded here for over 1,000 years, and hundreds of popes and millions of Catholics have accepted and venerated this skull as St. Peter's.
So we've got a skull there.
Yeah, you got a skull there.
But Peter couldn't have had two skulls.
No, I think that the body underneath St. Peter's Basilica did in fact lack a skull as well.
The body lacked a skull?
I think it lacked a skull.
And feet?
And feet.
Any other body parts missing?
Not to my knowledge. The reality is, though, that there was anthropological work done, and I don't think that the skull
You could try DNA
you could,
and see if it
yeah,
matches. If the skull matches the body.
That doesn't really match the body.
Really
but then
match.
again, it becomes tradition.
One of them has to definitely not be Peter. I mean, just
It's quite
logic.
possible that neither is Peter.
Thy
Cow bones, chicken bones, girl bones, guy bones, head bones, body bones, and heads without bodies. The fact is, churches all over the world claim to be guardians of various Peter parts. There are potential Peter pieces in Italy, all over England, Spain, France, Germany, Israel, and the US of A, and of course, on eBay. And some say that's because if you've got the relics, you've got the clout. Your church gathers a bigger congregation and you gain more respect. When the papacy switched from St. John Lateran to the Vatican Palace in the 15th century, it's reasonable to assume that St. John would have wanted to gather and house some sacred relics, if it meant keeping up with the Joneses, or the Peters in this case. And so for centuries, St. John Lateran has claimed the heads of both the apostles Peter and Paul. For many, a mismatching of bones doesn't weaken the belief in the least that St. Peter spent his last days in these two churches. But what if his coffin was found 1,800 miles away in Jerusalem?
Oh my goodness.
We're in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, and right over there is Dominus Flevit. And Dominus Flevit in Latin means the Lord wept. Because according to Christian tradition, Jesus saw the Temple Mount, which is right behind me, where the Dome of the Rock now stands, and there he foresaw the destruction of the Jewish temple, and he wept. In 1891, on the spot where he wept, according to tradition, the Franciscans built Dominus Flevit, a church. And in 1953, they decided to renovate the church, and they found something amazing. They found a 2,000-year-old necropolis.
And in this necropolis, the archaeologist Bellarmino Bagatti discovered these tombs.
Oh my goodness.
Along with hundreds of these stone coffins, many of them inscribed with what he believed were early Christian symbols and names. The evidence seemed to suggest that this necropolis was a long-standing early Christian burial site for some of the Jesus movement's most venerated dead.
There's more bone material right here.
And amongst these remains, they found an ossuary, a stone coffin inscribed in Aramaic, Simon, son of Jonah, the original name of St. Peter. Only a piece of the ossuary remains, housed in this church. The reading of the inscription is indisputable. However, it is difficult to get anyone to comment on it. After our appointment was canceled with the head father and curator of the Church of Flagellation, we thought we'd call back a few days later.
They are downstairs, Father. It's all right. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye. You have to bring a permission.
We have all the permission. We had an appointment and we came, and then he got very busy. We just need 5 minutes. We just want to speak about the Simon, son of Jonah ossuary, you know? The Vatican is built over what's supposed to be St. Peter's grave.
That's right.
That's right. And at the same time, right here, right in this museum, over here, there's a little bone box there with, it says Simon, son of Jonah. And that's Peter's real name. So if he's here, he can't be in Rome.
Huh? He's busy, that's it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, can we wait a bit and see? Maybe
I
he
don't
frees
know.
up.
I don't know when we will finish.
Yeah, just take one question about the box, the St. Peter's box. That's the only question.
Okay, never mind.
For 1 minute, just right here.
I don't know, it's up to you.
Yeah, okay, we'll just wait right here. We'll be very quiet. Oh, maybe that's Father Piccirillo.
They told me that he left, so please...
Really?
He left, yes, he left.
They have a state secret here. They have a state. The bone box of St. Peter. He snuck out the back.
When he will come back, and if you want, I can leave him a message.
Well, the second time, you know, we had an appointment. We came all the way. And...
So please, he left, yes.
Oh, well.
Sorry, huh?
And so for now, it seems this is where my search must end, with bated curiosity. And although I'm split between the strong traditions that Peter spent his last days in Rome and the compelling evidence behind these walls that suggest Peter's post-mortem presence in Jerusalem,
Felix.
I'm reminded of Professor Bartlett's words. Does it really matter? The remains of the man simply reference the spirit and power of the saint, and whether or not they're here or there, the saint is everywhere. leaving his footprints for those who choose to follow.
This crazy guy. Your favorite part. This crazy guy is at his tricks again. No. It's even worse.
It would cost a lot of money to move the Vatican here.
Archaeology.